The last stage, out of Perdition, the desert had a way of stripping a man down to his sins. Out there, under the blistering white sun, lies dried quicker than sweat, and the wind whispered everyone's secrets, eventually. The stagecoach rolled west through that infernal country, 6 horses foaming at the bit and the wheels screaming like damned souls. Inside rode 5 passengers, strangers only by name, each one carrying something they prayed the others wouldn't see. Reverend Samuel Holt sat nearest the door, one hand on his Bible and the other trembling beneath it. He'd been preaching 20 years and running from temptation just as long. The good book had more whiskey stains than tears these days. Beside him, Clara Finch, a widow too young for black lace, kept her veil drawn, her gloved fingers clasped around a small locket. Every bump in the trail made the chain rattle against her throat like a warning. She had the look of someone trying to remember how to breathe without permission. Opposite her lounged Lucien Voss, gambler and grinmaker, his eyes reflecting the gold he no longer had. His boots were polished, his luck wasn't. He shuffled a deck of cards in one hand, letting them whisper in a rhythm that filled the silence. Next to him sat a man in a tailored coat that didn't fit the dust, Agent Ethan Price of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, though he hadn't offered his name. He studied faces the way a snake measures distance to strike. And at the far end, in the corner shadow where light refused to linger, rode the Gunslinger. No one knew his name. His duster was the color of storm clouds, his hat brim dipped low, and his revolver sat easy on his thigh like an extension of his breath. He hadn't said a word since they left Perdition at dawn. For miles, only the rhythm of hooves and the moaning of the wheels filled the air. The desert stretched forever, flat, burning, and merciless. Then the horizon shimmered. A sound like thunder cracked from beneath the coach. The horses screamed, one shoe sparking against stone, and the stage lurched sideways. Dust exploded, wood splintered. The left wheel tore free and rolled into eternity. The world turned upside down. When it settled, silence swallowed the trail. The door hung half off its hinges. The coach tilted like a coffin ready to fall into its grave. The driver lay face down in the sand, unmoving. Lucien Voss crawled out first, coughing grit and blood. "Well," he muttered, spitting dust, "seems the good Lord wants us to walk the rest of the way." The Reverend stumbled after him, one eye already swelling purple. He looked at the driver and crossed himself. "He's gone." Clara climbed out last, holding her skirts and blinking against the glare. Her voice trembled when she asked, "How far to the next station?" 30 miles, give or take," Price said, brushing sand off his badge before tucking it back under his coat. His tone was calm, but his eyes moved to the ridge line, searching. And we're not alone. The Gunslinger stepped from the wreck like he'd been born from shadow, scanning the horizon. On the far hills, the air moved differently, a shimmer, a flicker, something more than heat. "Apache country," he said quietly. The word dropped like a stone in still water. Everyone froze. Lucien's grin faltered. The Reverend swallowed. Clara looked toward the broken, well, like it could somehow roll them out of hell. "Can they see us?" she asked. "They already could," the Gunslinger said. A wind kicked up, carrying the smell of iron and sagebrush. Price checked his rifle, loading rounds with clockwork precision. "We make for the ridge," he said. "There's an old telegraph station up there. Maybe shelter." Lucien scoffed. "You sure it ain't just another grave waiting for us?" The agent's gaze was cold. Only one way to find out. They started walking, 5 souls dragging secrets through the furnace of the West. The sun burned behind them, shadows stretching long and thin like guilty memories. By late afternoon, the world turned gold and cruel. The land was nothing but dust and silence, the kind of silence that makes a man talk just to prove he's alive. Lucien broke it first. "So, Reverend," he said, flashing a half-smile, "what brings a man of God out here in the devil's oven?" Holt wiped the sweat from his brow. "Mission work. The Lord sends me where I'm needed." Lucien's smile deepened. "And he told you to ride a stage with a killer, a thief, a widow, and a man who lies for a living?" The Reverend didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was confession enough. Clara walked a few paces behind, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her locket clinked softly with each step. "My husband used to say the desert's honest," she murmured. "It don't hide what it means to do." The gunslinger, walking nearest the horses, spoke for the first time in hours. "Neither should you." She looked at him sharply. "And what's that supposed to mean?" He didn't turn. "Means everybody here's running from something. You might as well stop pretending you ain't." Lucien laughed. A philosopher in a gun belt. Lord help us all. But no one laughed with him. When the sun fell, the land cooled, but the fear didn't. The ridge loomed ahead, black against the dying light. At the top stood the telegraph station, or what was left of it. Half the roof gone, windows blown out, the pole still standing like a crucifix to civilization. They reached it as the stars blinked awake. Inside was dark but dry. Price cleared a corner and lit a lantern. The flicker painted their faces, weary, wary, and too close together. Lucien threw himself into a chair and pulled out his deck of cards. "Guess it's just us and the Lord tonight." Clara sat near the wall, hands clasped tight. Holt muttered a prayer, and the gunslinger stood at the window, staring into the night. "Something's out there," he said. Price joined him, rifle ready. "How many?" The gunslinger didn't answer right away. The desert breathed. Wind through the scrub, the faint creak of old wood. Then, from the dark, a flicker of movement. 2, then 4, then more. Shadows slipping between moonlight and rock. "Enough," he said, "and they ain't coming to trade." Lucien's cards stopped mid-shuffle. The Reverend's prayer faltered. Clara whispered, "God help us." The gunslinger chamber round. "He's busy." Outside, a drumbeat began, soft, distant, rhythmic, the kind that crawled beneath your skin. The night closed in around the broken station. 5 strangers, 5 sins, and a circle of fire waiting beyond the walls. Night settled hard over the desert, a black sheet laid across a dying world. The wind had gone quiet, but the silence felt wrong. It wasn't the peace of rest, but the kind that waits before a scream. The fire they'd built in the ruins of the telegraph station burned small, careful, its glow catching the edges of 5 weary faces. The old roof groaned overhead, and the sand hissed where the heat met cold air. The gunslinger crouched by the window, eyes scanning the ridges. He could feel it, the watching. Out there, just beyond the reach of light, the Apache moved like smoke. They didn't make sound unless they wanted to. He'd ridden enough of this country to know what that meant. They were surrounded. Reverend Holt sat opposite the fire, his Bible open though he hadn't turned a page in an hour. His lips moved in silent prayer, but it looked more like bargaining than faith. Clara Finch watched the flames the way a widow watches a coffin, as though something precious were burning inside it. The locket at her neck glimmered every time the fire cracked. Lucien Voss leaned against the wall, card deck in hand, letting the paper slip between his fingers. 1, 2, 3, steady as a heartbeat. He grinned at the preacher. "You think your prayers will keep arrows out of our hides, Reverend?" Holt looked up, his face hollow in the glow. "Prayer keeps a man's soul steady when his body can't be." Lucien's grin widened. "Then I reckon I'll just trust my aim." Price, the Pinkerton, ignored them both. He sat cleaning his revolver with surgical patience, each motion deliberate. He'd said little since they stopped, but his silence wasn't calm. It was the kind that measured danger by the second. The gunslinger finally spoke. "They're waiting for something." Lucien snorted. "Like what?" "An invitation." "Light," the gunslinger said. "They hunt by it." The gambler glanced at the flames. "You saying put it out?" "I'm saying we might not see morning if we don't." No one moved at first. The fire was the only thing holding back the vastness, that endless dark. When it flickered, it felt like the whole world leaned closer to swallow them. But then Price rose, grabbed a canteen, and poured it slow over the coals. The hiss filled the room, sharp and final. The light died, leaving only the thin silver wash of moonlight through the cracks in the wall. The dark pressed in. Time lost meaning. They sat listening to their breathing, to the whisper of sand sliding across wood, to every small sound that might have been footsteps. Then Holt's voice broke the quiet. "Tell me," he said softly, looking at no one, "if the end comes tonight, who among you would God forgive?" Lucian chuckled in the dark. "That depends, Reverend, on who's telling him the story." Holt didn't rise to it. His eyes shone faintly in the half-light. "Every man carries his own noose. Only difference is how tight he pulls it." The gunslinger leaned back against the wall. "Preach all you want, Reverend. God's not out here." Clara turned to him, voice low. "You sound like you've looked." He didn't answer. The gambler stretched his legs, the cards whispering again. "Well, if this is confession hour, I'll start. Name's Lucian Voss. I lie, cheat, and steal. And if any of you die before me, I'll strip you clean and sell your boots in Yuma." Price gave him a long, even stare. "You think that's something to brag about?" Lucian shrugged. "It's something to remember me by." The preacher sighed. Even Cain wanted someone to remember him. "Yeah," Lucian said, and he got his wish. The wind shifted. The door creaked once. They froze. The gunslinger raised a hand, signaling silence. His other hand hovered near his revolver. Outside, something moved, slow, deliberate. The faint crunch of sand under bare feet. Clara's breathing quickened. "How many?" she whispered. He shook his head. "Don't know yet." Price slipped toward the doorway, crouched low, peering into the dark. The moon had climbed higher, painting the world in silver and shadow. The ridge beyond the ruins was empty. The desert looked still, too still. Then a faint sound rose, a coyote's cry, high and lonely. Another answered it. Then another. The gunslinger's eyes narrowed. "Signals." Lucian cursed under his breath. "So what now? We wait till they burn us out." Price looked at the fire pit's ash. "If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead already." "Then what do they want?" Clara asked. The gunslinger's voice was low. "They want to see what kind of people we are." An hour crawled by. The tension was its own storm. Holt whispered scripture under his breath. Lucian tapped the deck against his thigh. Price rechecked his rifle. Finally, Clara spoke, not to anyone, but to the dark. "My husband died on this road." The words hung like gun smoke. The others looked up. She kept her eyes on the embers. "He was a traitor. We were heading east, got caught between two war parties. I thought if I prayed hard enough, God would send someone. A patrol, a traveler, anyone." She paused, voice trembling. No one came. Just the wind. Just the sound of him choking on blood. No one said a word. "I buried him myself," she whispered. "And I kept walking. Figured if God wanted to kill me, he would have done it then." Lucian swallowed, all trace of humor gone. "Well, ma'am," he said softly, "maybe tonight he's still deciding." Price looked away. The Reverend crossed himself, eyes glassy. The gunslinger studied her face through the dim light. "You didn't tell us why you were riding west." She met his gaze steady hollow. "I wasn't riding west. I was running from east." Another sound. A faint click. Metal on stone. Everyone froze again. Price moved first, silent as a cat, slipping to the window. The gunslinger followed. Out beyond the ruins, something glinted in the moonlight. A row of shapes, small, low to the ground, maybe 20 yards out. "They're watching," Price murmured. "Counting," the gunslinger said. "Waiting to see if we're worth the fight." Lucian laughed once, too sharp. "Hell, they can have my winnings. Ain't worth my scalp." The Reverend's voice cut through the tension, calm and cracked. "They won't take what you don't give them, son." Lucian turned on him. "And what are you giving them, preacher?" "Mercy. I gave God the truth," Holt said. "He gave me silence." The gambler's laugh faded. "You talk like a man who's done worse than sin." Holt looked down at his Bible. "Sin's easy. What comes after is the hard part." The gunslinger's gaze flicked to him, something like recognition passing in his eyes. "You've killed," he said. "Not a question." The Reverend's fingers tightened around the leather binding. "Only once." Lucian grinned bitterly. "That's all it takes." The preacher looked up, eyes haunted. "It was my wife." The silence that followed was a living thing. Even the wind seemed to pull back. Clara whispered, "Why?" He looked into the fire's ghostly glow. "Because she stopped believing, and I couldn't stand to be alone in my faith." Lucian cursed under his breath. Price's hand tightened on his revolver, and the gunslinger said quietly, "You're in good company, Reverend." A rustle outside. Then, the sound of a horse. Price straightened. "We left ours with the driver." Could be he didn't finish. The door burst open. A man stumbled through, pale, bleeding while died. Not Apache. The driver. Briggs. He collapsed in the dirt, gasping. "They're coming there." An arrow punched through his back before he could finish. Clara screamed. The lantern shattered as Price dove for cover. The gunslinger fired once into the darkness, the muzzle flash lighting the room in violent orange. Another arrow slammed into the doorframe. Then another. "Down!" Price shouted. Lucien scrambled behind the overturned table. Holt clutched his Bible to his chest like a shield. Clara crawled to the far corner, shaking. The gunslinger reloaded, every motion practice precise. "We can't stay here," he growled. Price nodded. "We move on my mark. West Ridge. Rocks'll give us cover." Lucien spat, eyes wide. "And what then? They'll hunt us down like dogs." "Better dogs than ghosts," the gunslinger said. Another arrow whistled through the wall, close enough to slice air. The night pulsed with movement, shadows circling. The Reverend whispered a prayer. Clara clutched her locket, whispering something else, maybe to God, maybe to herself. The gunslinger looked at her once, then at the rest of them. "We move now," he said, voice low and final, "or we die waiting for forgiveness that ain't coming." And with that, he kicked open the side wall, splintering wood, spilling moonlight, and stepped into the storm of arrows. The rest followed. The night swallowed them whole. They ran through the broken wall, into a world of ghost light and grit. Arrows hissed through the air, slicing close enough to hear the feathers tremble. The gunslinger moved first, fast and low, returning fire with short, controlled bursts. Each flash from his revolver burned across the sand like a curse. Lucien stumbled behind him, clutching his side. Price pulled Clara by the arm, half dragging her toward the rocks west of the station. The Reverend came last, tripping, gasping, his breath ragged with prayer. They dove behind a low ridge of stone, the only cover for half a mile. The world pulsed with heat and heartbeat. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the wind. Only the faint crackle of fire from the ruin they'd left behind. Then Price peered over the rock. Nothing moved. No arrows. No figures. Just silence. "They're gone," he said, his voice taut. Lucien barked a short, disbelieving laugh. "Gone? They were 20 feet from cutting our throats." The gunslinger shook his head. "They'll wait for dawn. They hunt by patience." Clara sank against the rock, trembling. Her hands were raw where she'd scraped them. Her locket glimmered faintly in the moonlight. "They'll kill us," she whispered. "Every one of us." The gunslinger holstered his weapon. "Not if they don't find us before the sun." Price checked his ammo, then looked at him. "You know this country?" "I've bled in it," the gunslinger said. "That's enough." The answer hung there, dark and heavy. They waited. Time stretched thin. The fire back at the station burned lower, its glow fading to a dull pulse, the last heartbeat of safety. Lucien pulled a flask from his coat, took a swig, then passed it to the Reverend. "Care to toast the afterlife, preacher?" Holt hesitated, then took it. "I quit drinking," he said softly. Lucien's grin twisted. "Seems like a bad night for good habits." The Reverend drank. The whiskey burned through him like old guilt. He handed the flask to Clara, who didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon. "Something wrong?" Price asked. She nodded toward the east. Smoke. A thin column rose where the telegraph station had been. "They're burning it," she said. Lucien's laugh broke like glass. Good riddance. But no one joined him. Hours passed. The desert wind turned cold. They huddled beneath the ridge, the firelight now just memory. Price spoke first. "We can't stay here. We move at first light, head for the river. Might find a patrol if we're lucky." The gunslinger's gaze was distant. "Luck's a fool's language." Lucien shot him a look. "You sound like a man who's had too much of it." "I've seen what it costs," the gunslinger said. Lucien leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Then tell us. What's your story, stranger? You've been silent since Perdition. We all spilled our guts. It's your turn." The gunslinger said nothing. Price watched him carefully. He's not obliged. Lucian scoffed. Oh, come on. Everyone's out of reason for being on that damn stage. The widow runs from her ghosts. The preacher from his crime. The Pinkerton from what, shame? And me, well, I run because it's better than hanging. He turned to the gunslinger. So what about you, friend? What are you running from? The man's eyes lifted, pale, cold, and infinite. From a man I used to be. Which was? Lucian pressed. The gunslinger looked out toward the dark. A lawman. The word dropped like a stone. Price froze. You were a marshal? Once, he said, before the badge turned into a curse. The Reverend watched him. And what broke you? The gunslinger's voice came low. I shot a boy. 15. Robbed a train, fired at my deputy. Missed him, hit me instead. I shot back. Reflex, not justice. The boy's mother watched from the tracks. I never saw her face again, but I see it every night. Clara stared at him. So you ran? He nodded. Figure Perdition was a good place for ghosts. Lucian's grin faded. He looked down at his cards, shuffling without meaning. Hell, maybe we're all already dead. A coyote howled somewhere far off. The stars wheeled slowly above, cold and watching. Clara finally spoke. My husband wasn't killed by Apache, she said. Her voice trembled, not from fear, from confession. That's what I told you. But it isn't true. The others turned to her. He was killed by me. The words came small, fragile, but final. She looked at her hands. He'd been beating me for years. I thought I could bear it. Then one day he raised his hand again, and I raised the pistol. I shot him in the chest before I even thought. Then I walked until my feet bled. The Reverend crossed himself. The gambler whispered, Sweet Jesus. She smiled faintly, bitterly. I prayed for forgiveness, but God never answered. So I figured maybe he was waiting for me to say it out loud. The gunslinger said softly, He's listening now. She met his eyes. And what if he doesn't forgive? Then you live anyway, he said, because that's punishment enough. The wind rose again, soft at first, then sharper, carrying the scent of smoke and something else. Price stiffened. They're closer. Lucian looked around, panicked. How can you tell? Because the wind just shifted toward us, Price said. They're driving us west, hurting us. The gunslinger checked his gun. Let them try. But even as he said it, the truth sank in. They were being hunted, not attacked. Stalked like prey. They couldn't stay. Price rose. We move. Now. They started west, slow and low, the moon their only witness. The desert glowed silver, every shadow a threat. The Reverend stumbled often, muttering prayers. Clara kept pace, silent now. Her confession burned out of her like fever. Lucian walked behind them, pale and sweating, whispering half-mad jokes to himself. And the gunslinger led, every step cautious, every sense drawn tight as wire. They moved until the horizon began to pale, the first hint of dawn. Then they saw it, a dry riverbed cutting through the land, deep and narrow. The promise of cover. They slid down into it, breathless, spent. The Reverend fell to his knees and pressed his hands into the sand. Thank you, Lord, he murmured. But the gunslinger didn't stop. He scanned the banks, eyes cold. Something glimmered in the dirt. A piece of glass, smooth and curved. He knelt, brushed it off. It wasn't glass. It was bone. Human skull. Dozens of them. Half buried. Sun-bleached, forgotten. This isn't a riverbed, he said. His voice barely a whisper. It's a grave. Lucian backed up. You're kidding. The gunslinger shook his head. Massacre ground. Cavalry must have left it 20 years ago. Price cursed under his breath. We need to keep moving. But Clara stood frozen, staring at the bones. What kind of God leaves this? She whispered. The Reverend answered, hollow. The same one who lets us keep walking. They rested for a short while beneath the ridge. The air felt thick, heavy, like something watching them from beneath the sand. Lucian's voice cracked the silence. If I die out here, he said, you bury me somewhere folks can see the sky. I ain't rotting underground. No one replied. He looked around, eyes flicking from one to another. You'll remember me, won't you? Clara gave him a tired smile. You talk too much to be forgotten. He almost laughed. Then a sound stopped him cold, a sharp thwip. He looked down. An arrow stuck clean through his shoulder. He screamed. The gunslinger spun, fired toward the rim of the riverbed. Shadows moved, fast, fluid, circling. Down, Price shouted. He fired back, bullets sparking off rock. Clara dragged Lucian toward cover, her hands slick with blood. The Reverend crawled beside her, whispering scripture that broke into sobs. The gunslinger reloaded, his face expressionless. They waited till dawn, he muttered. They always wait till dawn. When the shooting stopped, the desert was still again. Lucian lay pale, breathing shallow. Clara pressed the wound, whispering for him to stay awake. The Reverend sat beside him, Bible open, voice cracking through the dry air. The Lord is my shepherd. Lucian's eyes fluttered. He smiled faintly. Then tell him to find me fast. And he was gone. The words drifted off with his last breath. The Reverend bowed his head. Clara closed Lucian's eyes. Price looked west, the sun rising blood-red. We moved before they circled back. The gunslinger holstered his revolver and glanced once at Lucian's body. Leave him. The desert's full of saints now. And as they started walking again, the light grew harsh and unforgiving, stretching their shadows long across the bones. Excellent. You've ridden far enough that there's no turning back now. This is where the desert judges them, where the line between man and myth, guilt and redemption, gets scorched by the sun. The sun rose like a blade. By noon, the desert shimmered with heat, a pale, quivering mirage. The four survivors moved through it like ghosts wearing skin. Price in front, the gunslinger close behind, Clara and Reverend Holt trailing. Lucian's body was long behind them, already half buried by sand and wind. None of them looked back. Their lips were cracked, their water nearly gone. The wind carried whispers, the kind that didn't belong to the living. And still they walked. The Reverend was the first to stumble. He fell to his knees, Bible slipping from his grasp, pages fluttering like dying birds. Leave me, he gasped. Clara bent beside him. You can't stop here. The Lord gives rest to the weary. The Lord didn't build this desert, the gunslinger said. He offered a hand. Holt didn't take it. Instead, his eyes lifted to the horizon and widened. Look, he whispered. Far off, through the veil of heat, a figure stood on a ridge, a lone horseman, dark against the glare. Price shaded his eyes. Scout, he muttered. They're tracking us. The gunslinger's jaw tightened. No, that's no Apache. How do you know? Because the devil doesn't ride with feathers, the gunslinger said. The rider sat motionless, watching. Then, slowly, he raised a rifle. Down! The shot cracked. A distant thunderclap. Sand exploded near Clara's feet. She screamed. The gunslinger fired back, the bullet echoing into silence. But when the dust cleared, the ridge was empty. The Reverend whispered, was he real? The gunslinger didn't answer. He just looked at his shaking hands, as if the heat had started crawling beneath his skin. They pressed on until sunset. By then, the world looked carved from blood and ash. Shadows stretched long and thin, and the heat turned into fever. They found a dry canyon, a wound in the earth, and took shelter beneath its walls. Clara sat apart, staring at nothing. The Reverend prayed. Price checked his revolver with mechanical calm. The gunslinger watched the horizon, where the last of the light burned like judgment. After a while, Price spoke. You never said what you were doing on that stage. The gunslinger didn't turn. Didn't think it mattered. It does now, Price said. Because whatever's following us, it's not just Apache. Someone else wanted that stage to burn. Clara looked up. What are you saying? I'm saying one of us brought the fire, Price said. The Reverend shook his head. You think one of us? I don't think, Price said. I know. There was gold on that coach. U.S. Treasury transfer from Yuma to Perdition. $50,000 in federal notes. Only the driver and I were supposed to know. The air froze. The gunslinger turned slowly. You're telling me we've been running for stolen money? Price met his eyes. We're running because someone tipped off the bandits. Someone on that coach. Clara's voice trembled. But we didn't even know, didn't you? Price said. Widow dressed in silk with no dust on her boots. Gambler with a revolver worth more than his teeth. Preacher with a Bible that jingles when he walks. The Reverend's face went white. The gunslinger stood. "What are you saying, Price?" Price rose too, gun drawn. "Empty your pockets, Reverend." Holt's hand shook. "Agent Price, I do it." The Reverend hesitated, then reached into his coat. Out came a leather pouch, small, heavy. He set it down in the sand. The cord came loose. Inside, gold notes. Crisp, untouched. Clara gasped. The Reverend started to speak, but his voice broke. "It wasn't theft," he whispered. It was deliverance." Price's jaw clenched. "That's a sermon, not an answer." "I was taking it to rebuild the church," Holt said, desperate now. "In Perdition. The roof collapsed last winter. The children froze. I begged the treasury. They denied me. So you robbed the Almighty," the gunslinger said quietly. The Reverend's eyes burned. "Don't you dare judge me. You think God cares what pocket his gold sleeps in, so long as it serves his will." Price cocked the hammer. "You're coming back with me." The Reverend shook his head. "You'll take me nowhere. I've already been judged." He reached into his coat again, fast. Price fired first. The bullet struck Holt in the chest. He fell hard, blood darkening his shirt. The pouch spilled beside him, the notes scattering like dry leaves. For a moment, no one breathed. Clara screamed. The echo tore across the canyon walls. The gunslinger grabbed Price by the collar and slammed him against the rock. He was reaching for his Bible. "Damn you." Price shoved him back. He was reaching for another gun. "You think I shoot men for sneezing?" The gunslinger's voice dropped to a whisper. "You just did." They buried the Reverend beneath the canyon wall. No words, no prayer, just the sound of wind over stone. The desert felt heavier afterward, as if it had taken something from each of them in trade. When they finished, Clara sat alone beside the shallow grave, staring at the sand. "There's no God here," she said. The gunslinger looked down at the mound. "Maybe there never was." Price turned away, jaw tight. "We move at dawn." Night came cruel and slow. The gunslinger couldn't sleep. Every sound in the dark sounded like hoofbeats. Every shadow looked like that rider on the ridge. He stared at the stars until his mind began to split at the seams. He thought of the boy he shot, the mother's face. Thought of Perdition, the broken streets, the stage rolling in like a coffin on wheels. And then he heard it. A voice. Soft, close. "You can't outrun sin, Marshall." He turned sharply, hand on his revolver. No one there. Just the wind, whispering his name through the canyon's hollow throat. "You wear like a badge," the voice said again. "Just carved deeper." He stood, breathing hard. The horizon shimmered with faint red, a mirage of fire. The desert was speaking now, or maybe the dead were. He whispered to the night, "Then take me." And the wind answered, "Not yet." By morning, the world was ash-colored. Price was already awake, tightening his belt, eyes sunken. Clara didn't speak. She moved like someone who'd stopped believing in tomorrow. They walked again, 3 left now. The canyon opened into flatland, the sky wide and merciless. Far ahead, the outline of an old mission rose out of the haze, half collapsed, its steeple tilting like a broken cross. Clara stopped. "Do you see that?" The gunslinger nodded. "Shelter, maybe." Price didn't like it. "Or a trap." The gunslinger's lips curved. "Out here, they're the same thing." They approached slowly. The mission was hollow, filled with sand and bones of old pews. Sunlight speared through cracks in the roof, turning the dust into drifting halos. Clara touched one of the walls, eyes wide. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The gunslinger looked around. "Beautiful things die hardest." Price circled the altar and froze. There, half buried in the dirt floor, was a Stagecoach strongbox. The brass plates still gleamed. U.S. Treasury, Yuma District. He knelt. "This is it," he said. "The rest of the gold." The gunslinger stared at it. A coffin of temptation. "Leave it," he said. Price looked up sharply. "What?" "Leave it," the gunslinger repeated. "It brought nothing but death." Price rose, gun drawn. "You don't get to decide that, Marshall." The word hit like a bullet. The gunslinger froze. "How long have you known?" "Since Perdition," Price said. You think a Pinkerton forgets a wanted face? Jeremiah Cole, ex-US Marshal, killed a suspect and vanished with blood on his badge. Clara's eyes widened. You're... Cole didn't look at her. His voice came calm, almost gentle. Then shoot me and finish it. Price aimed. That's the idea. The air hung still. Only the wind sighed through the broken rafters. Then Clara stepped between them. Stop. Get out of the way, Price snapped. She shook her head. You already killed one man for the law. You'll not kill another for pride. Price's hand trembled. Sweat dripped down his brow. Cole watched him steadily. No fear in his eyes. Only the look of a man who'd finally stopped running. Then a sound. A single arrow struck the wall beside them, quivering. They turned. Figures moved among the rocks outside, circling the ruins, silent and many. Price cursed, fired once, twice. The mission exploded in gunfire and screams. Cole dove for cover, pulling Claire down with him. Stay low, he shouted. Price kept shooting, yelling something about gold, about justice, until an arrow found him, straight through the throat. He fell beside the strongbox, blood spilling across the treasury seal. The desert was quiet again. Only Cole and Clara remained. She looked at him, tears and dust on her face. What now? He stared at the open door, at the endless, burning waste beyond. Now, he said, we bury the last lawman. And as they stepped out into the blinding light, the wind rose again, hot, relentless, almost merciful. Because in the desert, mercy and death speak the same tongue. Dawn came slow and red. The desert was quiet again, too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from everything worth making noise being dead. Jeremiah Cole stood over the broken mission, revolver heavy in his hand. The air stank of powder and blood. Around him, the silence stretched like a graveyard. Price's body lay where it fell, beside the strongbox, the gold glinting faintly under the morning sun. The arrows still jutted from the walls like the teeth of the earth itself. Cole turned to Clara. She was sitting in the doorway, staring out at the horizon. The wind tangled her hair, lifting it in strands of fire and shadow. Her face was pale, but steady. The face of someone who had seen hell and decided to keep walking anyway. He holstered his revolver and joined her. Neither spoke for a while. The desert didn't need words. Finally, Clara whispered, Are we the last? Cole nodded. For now. She drew her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. Why did you come to Perdition, Marshal? He looked down at his hands. Because I thought I could bury a man there. She frowned softly. Yourself. He nodded again. Figured if I went far enough into nowhere, maybe the noise in my head would die out. But it don't. Never does. She studied him for a long time. You carry it like a weight. Sin ain't light, he said. No, she said. But maybe it's not meant to be carried alone. He turned his gaze to her. The look in her eyes, steady, unblinking, was something between pity and recognition. It made him want to look away and also to never stop. They spent the morning burying the dead. They worked without speaking. Price first, his badge laid on his chest. Then the Reverend's grave was marked with a single stone, his Bible placed above it like a flag of surrender. Lucian's grave was left unmarked. Only a small circle of rocks near the riverbed. He'd wanted to be beneath the sky. The gambler got his wish. When it was done, Cole stood before the graves, hat in hand. Men die for all kinds of reasons, he said quietly. Gold, pride, faith, sometimes for nothing at all. But if there's a God out here, he keeps his own counsel. Clara's voice trembled beside him. Maybe that's the mercy. He looked at her. You still believe in mercy after all this? I have to, she said. If I don't, then every step I've taken since my husband's death means nothing. Her words hung in the dry air, fragile but unbroken. Cole nodded slowly. Then maybe you're the last good thing left in this desert. By midday, they started walking again, away from the mission, away from the bones, toward the faint shimmer of the western horizon. They had no water left, and no direction but west. The desert was endless, a sea of heat. The sun rode high, punishing. At times Clara staggered, dizzy, her lips cracked white. Cole would steady her with a hand under her arm. "Keep your eyes on the shadow," he told her. "If it's in front of you, you're still living." She smiled faintly. "You talk like a preacher." He shook his head. "Preachers lie better." But his voice softened when he added, "I'm just trying to get you home." By late afternoon, the land began to change. A thin thread of green appeared along the horizon. Cactus, mesquite, scrub. The smell of earth shifted, less like dust, more like life. Then a sound. Faint, metallic. A bell. They stopped, listening. The bell tolled again, slow, distant. Church or ranch, it didn't matter. It was civilization. Clara laughed. The first true sound of life either of them had made in days. "We made it," she whispered. Cole's eyes narrowed toward the west. Maybe, but when they reached the ridge, they saw it. A small settlement nestled against a dry arroyo. Half a dozen buildings, a windmill, a chapel. Smoke curling from chimneys. A living town. The sign over the entry read, "Redemption." Cole almost laughed. "Ain't that something?" Clara turned to him. "What?" He pointed. "Town's called Redemption." She looked at him, the name sinking in like a prayer. "Then that's where we stop." They walked into town as the sun dipped low, painting everything gold and crimson. People stared, dusty faces, cautious eyes. A man in a blood-stained duster and a woman with hollow cheeks weren't exactly welcome sights. A ranch hand approached, rifle slung low. "You two lost." Cole touched his hat. "Been found, I reckon." They were given water, bread, a place to sit beneath the windmill shadow. Clara drank first, slow, careful sips. The life came back in her face like dawn through fog. Cole drank after, then leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, just stillness. Later, in the fading light, they sat outside the small chapel on the hill. Clara watched the sky turn from gold to violet. "What will you do now?" Cole thought for a long time. "Maybe I'll ride north. Maybe I'll dig a well. Doesn't much matter." She smiled softly. "It matters to me." He turned to her, brow furrowed. "I don't want to go back," she said. "Not to the past. Not to who I was." He looked out over the land. The thin smoke, the cattle beyond the ridge, the windmill creaking against the dying sun. "There's a preacher buried a day east of here," he said. "Maybe he'd want that church rebuilt." Her eyes glimmered. "You'd help." "I ain't much for churches," he said, "but I can swing a hammer." She laughed, tired real. For the first time, he smiled too. Night came soft. The desert no longer looked like a wasteland, more like a memory. The stars came out one by one, patient as grace. Clara slept inside the chapel that night, on a pew beneath the cracked window. Cole stayed outside, beside the steps, hat over his eyes, revolver beside him. But he didn't sleep. He stared at the sky, at the endless field of light, and wondered if somewhere out there, the boy he'd killed was looking back. He whispered a few words into the dark. Not prayer, not penance. Just truth. "I did wrong. But I kept walking." The wind stirred the dust around him. Gentle this time, not cruel. Maybe that was answer enough. When dawn rose again, Clara found him sitting in the same spot, quiet and still. He looked up at her and nodded toward the sun. "Guess it's another day." She smiled. "Guess it is." They walked together down the dirt road, past the windmill and the graves beyond, toward the wide horizon. The desert stretched out before them, vast, indifferent, and beautiful. For the first time, it didn't look like judgment. It looked like freedom. And somewhere behind them, the old bell of redemption tolled once more, slow, solemn, but not mourning, just marking time. Some men ride towards salvation. Others just walk until the road forgives them.